Alright, everybody, listen up close here. The time has come. You've fought the bugs, you've fought the bots, and you've fought them all admirably. But we face a threat greater than both of them combined. The Illuminate are back. Sir, does this mean we're all gonna become zombies? Only if you let them capture you, Billy, so make sure that doesn't happen. You heard that right. The Illuminate are back in Helldivers 2. They were I don't know if I want to say loved, maybe more hated enemy in Helldivers 1 because they were a pain to fight. But the fact that they are back now in Helldivers 2 and look a whole lot different than they did in the first game has huge lore implications. Now, to properly explain how these new Illuminate fit into the Helldivers universe, we really should cover the Helldivers 1 Illuminate first. Should, but I am way too excited about the new Illuminate, and I know you are way too excited about the new Illuminate, so I'm going to get to the juicy part first and not hold off till the end. It's time to talk about the new Illuminate in the game. Now, one of the first key enemies in this new version of the Illuminates is an enemy called the Voteless. And the Voteless are actually the citizens of Super-Earth themselves, who have been captured and mind-controlled to fight for the Illuminate. Now, the Illuminate have always had the ability to mind-control humans. In the first game, this showed up as the Illuminate would make the player have their controls reversed and have a tough time calling in stratagems and aiming. But why is it now that the Illuminate are taking over the citizens of Super-Earth and literally turning them into zombies? That is because after the first Galactic War in Helldivers 1, the Illuminate were beaten back so badly they were forced to move to a far-off corner of the Milky Way galaxy and try to recover. But their numbers were so reduced from this horrible Galactic War that they needed to turn to alternative methods in reinforcing their numbers. We can assume that the Illuminate can't reproduce anywhere near as fast as humanity, so they had to turn to questionable methods to try to build back their forces against Super-Earth. And the method they came up with was using their mind control powers to make zombies out of people. Now, it's not exactly known how these zombies are made, but in the first game, the Illuminate used nanobots to control people. They weren't actually mind controlling you with space magic, it was nanobots that would take over your nerves and make you do things you didn't want to. But the way that these Voteless have transformed from normal humans now, it sure makes it look like there's some darker powers involved, and maybe they did contact some sort of space god to do their bidding. But you don't only fight the shambling citizens of Super-Earth, you also fight the Illuminate themselves, so let's start talking about them. Now, this may not be a full encompassing video of all the Illuminate enemies because it's too soon to tell if this is all the Illuminate enemies. In the release of this update, the developers said this is a vanguard fleet of the Illuminate and the main force will be showing up later, so that could mean new enemies to fight, but we're going to cover the ones we have now the best we can. The first enemy we have to talk about here is called the Overseer, and the Overseer is the guy you fight with the big staff and little shield. The Overseer here, as the name implies, likely controls the hordes of voteless zombies that are attacking you. Now, I do want to talk about this Overseer's shield a little bit, because this is not the first enemy we've seen with the shield. You had the Hive Guard from the Terminids that would sit there and block things with its face, and you had the Shield Devastators that were absolute pain to deal with, but this guy's shield is different. It's an energy shield. And you will see that these energy shields are going to become a major theme of the Illuminate. And they were so in the first game too. A lot of Illuminate in the first game had bubble shields around them that you'd have to break first before you could even do damage to them. And while we're comparing to Helldivers 1 here, the Overseer sure looks a whole lot like the Apprentice from the first game. In the first game, the Apprentice did not get a shield. And you'll notice that this guy, the Overseer, does not have a bubble shield like many other enemies in the first game. They just kind of gave him a hand shield to hold in front of him, so it's likely less advanced tech, and they're willing to give this out to just the base level troops. But I do want to talk about the Overseer's name a little bit, because the Overseer is controlling these voteless zombies. But I don't think that this is the guy that made them into zombies, because the Overseer name implies that he's just controlling them around and showing them where the fight is. I think a much stronger enemy actually turned the citizens of Super-Earth into these zombies. Now, there is another variation on the Overseer. You've got the Elevated Overseer, who is called the Elevated Overseer because, well, they fly. They also get a gun that they shoot at you with. Whereas the normal Overseers have the staff that can shoot at you, this guy's got a little, like, machine gun, and, oh, they can fly really well, and they're tough to deal with, I tell you what. Now, if you think Illuminate just got smaller, quicker troops because this is just a vanguard, oh, you'd be sorely mistaken because they have a massive tripod walker called the Harvester. This thing has a giant bubble shield you need to break. It's got a laser beam it shoots out of its eye that can almost one-shot you. This thing is a monstrosity. And I do want to talk about the shield a little more because it's an all-encompassing shield of the Harvester. The Overseer had a little shield they hold in front of them you have to break before you take them out, and you know what? If you have a friend, they can just shoot them behind the shield. But this Harvester has an all-encompassing shield you have to break before you can even try to do damage to them. These walkers are going to be a far greater threat to deal with than, say, a Bile Titan, because it's not just, oh, there's the weak point, hit the weak point. You got to do something to break this shield first, and then you can actually hit this thing's weak points. You're probably going to want to throw some stratagems at this guy, and then you can start shooting at it with normal weapons. And giant tripod walkers are not new to the Illuminate. Back in Helldivers 1, they had an enemy called the Strider, which was more or less exactly what the Harvester is now, but the Harvester looks a whole lot more decayed and dark, and still kind of leads more to the theory that these Illuminate are working with some sort of dark space god to help them fight back against humanity, and it's mutated them in some pretty disgusting ways. And also, if you compare the two, it looks like the Harvester is a whole lot bigger than the Strider ever was. It's kind of tough to tell, but in the first game, it looks like the Strider's maybe 2-3 times the height of the player, and in Helldivers 2, oh my god, this thing is, I don't know, 10 times? It's taller than a Bile Titan. This thing's insane. Now here's where things get really interesting for these new Illuminate. That is how they spawn in to fight you on the battlefield, because they have these things called warp ships. And these warp ships do change the difficulty to take out. At lower level missions, they just have basic shields and nothing crazy, they're not too bad to take out. But the higher difficulties, they have these shock towers that are a lot like the Tesla towers we can call in as Helldivers. Now, these warp ships act like the factories for the automatons and the bug holes for the bugs. And they just sit there and just constantly pump out enemies, except they pump out the voteless, and they just dump them onto the battlefield. Which implies that the voteless are kind of made somewhere else, and they send them out to go fight. So they're not turned into these voteless zombies right on the battlefield, they're taken back to some sort of facility and turned into zombies. But these warp ships aren't just restrained to the ground to call in voteless and little swarms. No. They can appear during the battle and drop off much tougher enemies. Let's talk about how they get called in. Now, the bugs and bots, their basic units can call in reinforcements. The bots will just shoot up a flare, the bugs will use their weird bug sense was not call in reinforcements, but the Illuminate have a very specific enemy to call reinforcements. They have the Watcher. The Watcher floats around the battlefield just looking for Helldivers to point out, and when they see you, they'll turn purple, stare at you, and follow you around. And if they get off their beacon, they're going to call in a warp ship that brings down much tougher enemies than just the voteless. They're bringing in Overseers. They might even bring in the Harvester, the giant walker. And you can't shake this thing by just running away. It will follow you and keep calling in things until you kill it. So take these things out as soon as you can. Now, I mentioned earlier in this video that this is the Vanguard fleet of the Illuminate, and there's a main fleet coming later. And I want to look back at some of the Helldivers 1 enemies to speculate what type of enemies we might see show up in that main fleet. One enemy is in Helldivers 1 that I suspect we're going to get equivalent for in Helldivers 2 was called the Hunter. And if you played Helldivers 1, you know about the Hunter, and are slightly traumatized from the Hunter, because this was the sniper unit the Illuminate had. This guy would sit in the back lines of fights and just shoot giant purple energy beams at you and take you out in one shot. I think when the main Illuminated fleet arrives, we're going to get some sort of sniper unit like this that's going to be fighting us. Another enemy I suspect we'll see when the main fleet arrives is something comparable to the Illusionist or the Council member. These were two enemies that sat in giant floating chairs and had bubble shields around them constantly. Now, these were the enemies in the first game that had the mind control powers. They could reverse the way you were walking. They could reverse the way you were aiming. They'd mess up your stratagem inputs. I suspect when a similar enemy like these shows up in Helldivers 2, they're going to have the same type of abilities. They're going to be able to confuse which way you're walking. They're going to mess up your stratagem inputs. They're going to be a pain to deal with, but I think they're going to be fun to fight. And I did mention earlier that I don't think these Overseers are the one turning people into zombies. I think whatever equivalent we have now to these Illusionists and Council members, they are the ones turning people into these voteless zombies. Since they had the mind control powers in the first game, I suspect they're the ones that mutate and mind control the citizens of Super Earth now in Helldivers 2. Now, while we do have the Harvester, that is just the bigger, scarier version of the Strider, the Illuminate in Helldivers 1 also had a tank, and it was called the Obelisk. This thing would get called in, and if an alarm was raised, as just one singular tank. It's much like the Automaton's tank, and it would just show up and be able to deal a whole ton of damage and take a whole lot of hits. I suspect when the main fleet arrives, they're going to have some sort of tank like this that's going to roll out to take out the Helldivers. And seeing how much more decayed and creepy the Harvester has come compared to the Strider, I think that whatever tank that the Illuminate have now is going to be the same kind of case. It's going to be all torn up and much of darker energy and vibe about it. Now, there is a lot of lore implication to the Illuminate coming back, but I don't want to speculate quite yet on it because we just don't know that much. They've just showed up. I want to give it a few major orders to really kind of be able to dig into the story and digest why they're here, what they're doing, and how they seem to become so dark and twisted. So with that, I'm going to call today's video here because we just don't know enough about the Illuminate to speculate yet. But please stay tuned for more, because the second we do know, I'm going to start digging into that lore, I'm going to talk about any new enemies that show up, and we're going to get some fun stuff going. So, if you enjoyed this video, I'd love you to hit the like button down below, and consider subscribing to stay tuned for more, because this update added a ton of new stuff. It's not just the Illuminate. There's the vehicle we didn't even talk about, but you know what? That's not for today, so tune in next time. Thank you, and goodbye.